All right, this is Unit 1.1. What is a system? So, a system is components that work together that perform a function. So, the properties of a system, you have boundaries and components, inputs and outputs. You can have an open versus a closed system, and you do have controls, which is not a property of a system. So, boundaries and components are parts of the system as well as inputs and outputs. An emergent property can be present. An emergent property is a property that a system has that is not present when the components are alone. So, it's a novel function that comes from the system being whole and together. So the correct answer for this, that is not a property of a system, is an emergent property. A boundary is what separates something from the environment. A component is a part of the system, and there can be many components or there can be just a few, and each one has a function in that system. So a system couldn't actually be a rock because there's only one component. You need multiple components as a system. So, what would be the boundary and components of a cell phone? The boundary would be the outside, and the components would be your chip, your SIM card, your speakers, your screen, your buttons. All of those are parts separate from each other that work together to form the entire system. A component of a cell phone is music played from the speakers. Is that true or false? That would be false because it's an output of the system rather than a component. A component would be the speakers themselves, um, but the music played from it is an output. An organized group of related parts that interact to form a whole is, again, a system. A boundary is what separates something from the environment. That's a very important concept because we define the boundary. The entire thing of the system is a man made construct. And the components are parts of the system, but again, they're defined by us. So each one has to have a function, even if it's a place saver, it still has a function. So, what would be the boundary of a human body? And just name one component. So, a boundary of a human body would be skin, and one component might be your heart. An open system is something where you can have input or and output in and out of the system. Closed has limits. That means that you might have energy flow in, but that's it. Um, Open means wide open to energy and matter. Closed will have specific things that it would be open to either input or output. And isolated, there's no flow from the system to the environment, which is only theoretically possible. So, what type of system is your body? Well, that would be open because you have matter coming in, which is energy. You also have stimuli coming in, and then you have all movement, information, sound coming out, as well as waste products in urine. What type of system would your phone be? That could be considered closed because it has a limit. You don't have matter coming in and out of the cell phone, but you do have energy coming in and out when you charge it, and then energy in the form of heat or light, which shows the display. So in that, you're stating the limits of that system. So feedback is any information that is returned to the system about the system. It does not have to be from the system. It can be from the system, or it can be external. So here's an example of feedback where, and this is part of your book, where you have a thermometer inside the thermostat, and then it measures the temperature of the room, which causes it to kick on or off. So if your thermostat is set at 78, the air temperature reaches 79, which is number 5. What happens next? So if you read these, you'll see that the air conditioner cannot turn on because the thermostat does not know that it is 79. So you have to see the thermostat has to sense the increase in temperature, which would be an example of input feedback from the system. And then the air conditioner turns on, which would be an example of output. What is an example of feedback for your body? There's a lot of answers here. Some of the ones that I like the best are um, the feeling of hunger, or when your stomach growls because you're hungry, your blood glucose has dropped down, and your body is attempting to persuade you to eat by making you feel hungry or having your stomach rumble. Another example would be pain. If you've injured yourself, you'll feel pain to let you know that that area is injured and to dissuade you from using it until it can actually be healed, at which point you no longer feel pain because it can be used as needed. So a feedback loop, remember, is where input comes into the system about the system. Output is something that the system puts out. And remember, homeostasis is maintenance of an stable internal environment. So an example using a biotic system of a feedback loop could even be, um, we can go still into the blood glucose, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but if your blood glucose goes down too much, you can have a release of hormones that will cause it to go back up. Or if it goes down, you can have hunger pangs, which will then get you to eat and maintain homeostasis. Um, so you just want to specify that input is something coming into the system, output is something that is happening, or something that's being done, or something that's being observed, and homeostasis is maintaining a stable internal environment. So pretty much anything with a biotic system is going to be with the goal of maintaining that homeostasis. So let's do it. It's very bright. You squint your eyes. So the feedback here, the input, too much light. The output is squinting. And you're maintaining homeostasis, a stable I can't spell. A stable internal environment by um, lowering the amount of light into your retinas. So you're trying to control the amount of light and keep it in the range that's most comfortable. Another example would be a feedback loop of a feedback loop would be pain from an injury. Input into the system would be a force that damaged a component. The output would be a feeling of pain, again, maintaining homeostasis. Feeling of hunger. I already said this. All right, so knowing the difference between biotic and abiotic factors, biotic is or was alive, abiotic not living and not made from a living thing. So abiotic includes sunlight, precipitation, wind, rock, sand, not soil, because soil is the or and slash dirt is the remains of living organisms, feces, decayed organisms, things that have been alive at some point. Dirt is not alive. That is false. We talked about these system models. A physical model you can touch. Conceptual model is like a flow chart. A mathematical model is any kind of equation, and a simulation is a computer generated way to manipulate variables in some type of system. All right, so as we talk about biology, we're going to see that biotic organisms, well, all organisms are biotic, um, have emergent properties. This, again, is a property that a system has that its components do not have individually. So anything that's alive actually really does have an emergent property because it's sustaining life. If you take away any of those components, you're going to lose the ability to be alive. All right, so an example of a system with emergent properties that is not alive or abiotic, the example I used in class is a pencil, where the lead writes on the paper. The eraser can erase things, but nothing can do that. Um, it doesn't work on its own, right? So if you just have the carbon laying in a pile and the wood laying in a pile and the eraser laying in a pile, you wouldn't be able to do that. Another example of an abiotic system is a cell phone. Right? So all the components together work to allow you to use your phone, but any of the components alone would not be able to um, produce the things that your cell phone can do. All right, so please make sure that you know the atmosphere, hydrosphere, geosphere, and biosphere. These are super simple. You learn them in middle school. You learned them last year in environmental science. So the atmosphere is the air that envelops the Earth. That includes many gases. Um, the hydrosphere is all the water. The geosphere is all the solid matter at and below the crust. That includes rocks as well as all the layers of the Earth, including the core. And then the biosphere is the area of the Earth that supports life along with the life in there. So make sure that you know the water cycle. Right? We have our evaporation, where you have water evaporates due to solar energy giving it enough kinetic energy to enter its gas state, and then it goes up into the clouds. Remember that this water, even if it's over a marine environment, salt water, is going to be pure water. Distilled water is the only thing that can evaporate. It does not take its um, anything that's dissolved in it with it. And then your precipitation is when the clouds meet some type of anomaly that causes precipitation to fall, and percolation is when that rain filters through into an underground aquifer and then goes into the stream or percolates through the soil and goes into a river or a stream that enters a body of water. My job is. Hey, Colorado. Do air quality regulations start on May 1st?
Earth's interconnected cycles. Air, land, water, and life are all interconnected. The different systems of Earth are known as the atmosphere, lithosphere,
Geosphere.
hydrosphere, and biosphere. These systems work together to create our world. In order to understand the relationship between these systems, we need to understand that each system is a group of related elements that form a complex whole. Take a breath. You are breathing in air from our atmosphere. The atmosphere, from the Greek word atmos, meaning vapor, is a thin layer of gases surrounding the planet. The atmosphere serves many functions. It offers protection from UV radiation, helps hold in heat to warm the planet's surface, and contains the oxygen and carbon dioxide required for animal and plant life. Earth's atmosphere comprises 78% of nitrogen, 20.95% of oxygen, 0.93% of argon, and 0.039% of carbon dioxide and other gases. The hydrosphere, from the Greek word hydro, meaning water, includes all of the water covering Earth, both in liquid and solid form. 71% of Earth is covered in water, from the depths of the ocean to the ice-capped peaks of the mountains. The hydrosphere is all around us. Our biosphere, bio meaning life, contains all of the life on Earth. Living beings are found everywhere on Earth, even on the parts that appear to be uninhabited. The biosphere overlaps the atmosphere, lithosphere, and hydrosphere. We are part of the biosphere, as are the crops that we grow and the pets that we keep. Every living being, from tiny bacteria to blue whales, is part of Earth's biosphere. Earth's crust and upper part of the mantle make up the lithosphere, which is from the Greek word for stone, lithos. Our lithosphere consists of approximately the first 60 miles of solid material from the surface of the planet down. This is also referred to as Earth's crust. The lithosphere constantly changes because of shifts in the tectonic plates.
So, which Earth system includes all other Earth systems? And the correct answer is a biosphere. Now, understanding what each one of these are and how they interact with each other is extremely important. So, what would be an example of multiple spheres working together? An example would be an organism breathing, right? So that's the biosphere interacting with the atmosphere because it's bringing in the gases. Or an organism drinking water, or swimming through water, or a dolphin swimming through water and then coming up to the surface to breathe. So that would be the hydrosphere, the atmosphere, and the biosphere. Which of these best describes how the atmosphere and hydrosphere rely on each other? So the correct answer is to allow the water cycle to constantly provide fresh water for Earth so that um, evaporation and precipitation allow fresh water to come from the marine environment, the salt water. Does it help maintain a consistent temperature for life on Earth? Yes, the atmosphere in conjunction with water, carbon dioxide, methane, all help regulate temperature, as well as even oxygen as well. Understand how the organization of the biosphere, individuals make up a population, populations make up a community, communities make up ecosystems, ecosystems make up biomes, and then biomes make up the biosphere. You've done this in middle school, so I'm not going to spend too much time talking about this. Which of the following would be considered biotic? Remember, biotic means it's alive. So we talked about this. Soil is the only one that would be considered biotic. The geosphere is one of four interconnected systems and includes, the correct answer is the features on and below the Earth's surface. You need to know the characteristics of life. Again, this is a man made construct, so there is some argument as to whether viruses are living things. They do not have a cell, right? So they aren't made up of one or more cells. They do not have a metabolism. They do not grow or change over time. They cannot reproduce on their own. They cannot respond to changes in the environment. They cannot maintain homeostasis, but they do have DNA and they undergo natural selection. And they do infect living cells. After the infection, then they actually do have all these characteristics, but alone they do not. So that's where the debate comes in. So please make sure that you know that in order to be alive, you have to be made up of one cell, have a metabolism, or utilize energy, grow and or change over time, reproduce, respond to changes in the environment. In other words, maintain homeostasis. Right? So if you respond to changes in the environment, that doesn't mean you have to move or react. It just means that if, say, it gets cold, you're able to conserve your resources to maintain homeostasis, then you have to have DNA. So if this helps dog race, it seems like a lot of you are struggling with um, knowing these characteristics of life. What do you think of these characteristics? With the definition, viruses aren't alive. That's something for you to consider. Which statement is true of the many parts of the biosphere? Each part is isolated from all others. All contain water. Each part only contains abiotic factors, or each part is interconnected to each other. So we just watched that movie. Each part is interconnected. You'll have to do that. Which of the following are not a requirement to be considered alive? Responding to the environment, must contain at least one cell, homeostasis, grow or change over time, metabolism, or eating. So the correct answer, you don't have to eat. Which of the following are not requirements to be considered alive? Maintain homeostasis, reproduce, grow or change over time, or contain at least two cells? You only need one cell to be alive.
So let's say you have Google Fi, a phone plan by Google.
Let's talk about a difficult concept, the Gaia hypothesis, or some people would prefer that it's called a theory now at this point. James Lovelock was working for NASA and coming up with a method to see if there was life on other planets by looking at them through a telescope instead of traveling there, much more cost effective, and using the light coming from the planet to then estimate what the atmosphere was made of. So in his moment of insight, he realized that he could use what it would look like to look at the Earth from space as a model for what light frequencies might be reflected off of an atmosphere of a planet that had an atmosphere capable of sustaining life. What he realized then was that the gases in the atmosphere that reflect the light come from living things. That living things aren't just in the atmosphere, but that they help maintain the level of gases in the atmosphere. So they're helping to maintain the Earth as well. So he had this idea of the Gaia hypothesis, that the Earth behaves like a living thing, in that it maintains its own homeostasis, mostly keeping its temperature constant or relatively constant. He wasn't saying it was a living organism, as it isn't self-replicating, but it exhibits the same characteristics of maintaining itself and its own temperature like living things do. And he proposed that the living things and the physical Earth are in collaboration with each other. But what came first, and what is the driving force? Well, this is kind of a chicken and egg question to some degree. The Earth was certainly here, um, physically and geologically active before life. And the geology was very active early on. Volcanoes were erupting, meteors were striking the surface and putting gases and dust into the atmosphere, and so on. And this certainly had an effect on the composition of the atmosphere. And it's common to think then the Earth came geologically first, and then after the Earth was physically formed and all set and ready, life could appear and evolve on the planet. But of course, we know that life itself, instead of just responding and evolving on the planet, is actually participating in the evolution of the physical planet as well, and the makeup of the atmosphere. So Lovelock came along and proposed that in actuality, these two things are working together in concert with one another, the living systems and the geological systems to maintain the atmosphere. So let's consider a very simplified carbon cycle. The rabbit breathes out carbon dioxide, and the plant breathes that in and then releases oxygen. These two kinds of organisms participate in a cycle that maintains CO2 and oxygen levels in the atmosphere. But that's not all. The animal is also breathing out water that ends up in the atmosphere. And eventually, that water rains back down and is absorbed by the plant, which passes the water on to the animal that eats it. Not only are the plants and the animals connected to each other, they are interconnected within the atmosphere and with the atmosphere. As the Earth gets covered with plants and ice, these are reflective surfaces, and so they cool the planet. And life responds by evolving species that can survive in cooler climates, cooler temperatures. If the amount of plants reduced, for example, or the amount of reflective ice changes, or CO2 is added to the atmosphere, this can cause more heat to be absorbed, and that raises the temperature a bit, which might affect the life as well, which then affects the gases in the atmosphere or the reflectivity of the planet itself, which might then again cause the temperature to lower a little bit. So the Earth is governed by this thermostat of living things, if you will, and that maintains the homeostasis. So we have this feedback loop. The temperature rises, which changes the kind of life on the planet, which then might lower the temperature slightly, just like shutting off the heat on a home furnace with a thermostat as the temperature rises. This allows the planet to maintain a narrow temperature range that supports life. And this creates then a negative feedback loop, because it's a negative feedback loop, uh, not meaning that it's bad, but meaning that as something goes in one direction positive, then the system responds by bringing it back to the center. So we have this negative feedback loop allowing the Earth to maintain its own homeostasis through a complex interaction between the living Earth and the geologic Earth. And this is the Gaia hypothesis, or now maybe it should be called the Gaia theory, as proposed by James Lovelock.
This is Summer. After her second pregnancy, she said she put on 90 pounds.
What is the Gaia hypothesis theory? Earth systems are not necessary for life on Earth. Earth systems do not interact. Earth is a thinking being that regulates each Earth system or Earth system interact to yield a biosphere. So this is very alluring. Earth is a thinking being. That's the key word that's not right. Earth acts like a being in that it regulates its temperature. But a better explanation, Earth systems interact to yield that biosphere. Right? So you have the biosphere interacting with the atmosphere and maintaining that narrow range of temperatures. Homeostasis is, this is straight from the vocab, the ability to maintain a stable internal environment. And that is it.